the chat box as we go, and we'll also have a bit of a live session for time for some live Q&A, and we can come back to some of those notes as well. So Prashant is an internationally recognised, award-winning, inspirational and innovative teacher, researcher of economics and business analytics at Macquarie University, and I should mention also an MQ alumnus. Prashant is a fellow of the Higher Education Academy and has a PhD in the learning and teaching of economics, has presented learning and teaching workshops across Australia, South Asia and the UK in business and economics education across all disciplines. Prashant is part of the team that designs, develops and delivers the university's award-winning Excel courses on the Coursera platform, which is reaching more than 100,000 learners globally. It's an absolutely huge and incredibly successful program. Prashant is regularly called upon by both industry and government bodies to provide consulting expertise and to run seminars, especially during these COVIDian times, and has also received citations for outstanding contribution to student learning at the 2019 Australian Awards for University Teaching. Also recently receiving the inaugural Australian Business Deans Council Award for Innovation and Excellence in Teaching and Learning in 2020. So a very impressive CV. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Prashant.
Oh dear, Matt. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you everyone for I'm assuming the audio is okay? Awesome. Thank you for having me. Honored to speak to you and honored to be here and hopefully learn and grow from you as well. I'd love to hear the Thai experience and other countries' experiences in this space. I guess this pandemic has shown we are all in this together and we're all experiencing interesting shocks together and everyone's got different ideas. I have a lens, doesn't necessarily mean it's the only way to look at this. So I'll present from my point of view, which is, as Matt mentioned, both learning and teaching as well as economics. So I'm just going to be talking to you about the economic and business impact of the pandemic and what I think could be some strategies for you as an individual or your career or the business you work for or the business you run during such uncertain times. Now, regarding the uncertainty of these times, I was just going through, this is from the PricewaterhouseCoopers based research, the global economy predictions for 2021, and they identified three themes for 2021. The global economy is projected to grow at record speed. It's funny that after a recession and a pandemic. But the recovery will be uneven across sectors, across countries, and across income levels. So we're having this microeconomics versus macroeconomics issue. So on aggregate, economies may be growing faster, but not every sector of the economy, not every country, not every demographic group in a country will be impacted evenly. And is a great chance for us to rethink and pivot towards greener, climate-friendly industries and solutions and ways of working. And that's the global economic outlook. I've just got some predictions for Australia from the Reserve Bank of Australia. And of course, this is not for every country in the world, but every country will go through a similar phase of getting out of this recession or downturn at least. And the Reserve Bank of Australia doesn't know the answer. As you can see, the pink is their prediction for the forecast of where GDP will be. There's three different scenarios that they're still working around. And you can ask 10 commentators and you probably get 10 answers as to when and what's the amplitude of the economic pickup. When will it happen? Very uncertain questions. When is it going to happen? And the size of the change in economic activity. Interestingly, Australia's approach has been, especially with the budget that was delivered recently, is a lot of government expenditure to help us out of this situation. And it's a very interesting chart. When I look at it, I laugh every time because you've got consumption in the dark blue and disposable income in the red. Both are steadily growing pre and post pandemic. But you can see during 2020, this massive drop in consumption and then this massive increase in disposable income. And in Australia's case, and lots of Western European countries, North America, the government has been stimulating the economy by giving handouts to sectors, giving handouts to individuals. So people's bank balances are actually skyrocketing, but the economies are in a recession or growing slowly, and consumption is going in the complete opposite direction. Of course, now we're recovering from that and getting towards some normal growth rates, but it's interesting the amount of government intervention that's been needed to kind of counteract what's been happening across the world. And I guess the themes of what I will be talking to you, and I mentioned this to the Japan network as well, is we shouldn't get into this situation. We should plan. We should make sure that we are skilled, either as individuals or either our businesses or economies in general, so that we are flexible and that whenever a shock occurs, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's a financial shock, whether it's a natural disaster, that we can self navigate out of it without this huge investment from the government side. And I'm not saying it's wrong that the government's doing it. I'm just saying that it's interesting that how much countries around the world have had to push what we call fiscal policy, i.e., government policy, into overdrive. Now, as to what should that government policy look like, there's so many different scenarios. And this is some research in Australia about 4 different scenarios to address the pandemic. One mindset, one school of thought is grow at all costs. We should just spend our way out of this and emphasize economic growth, and that's the way out of the recessionary or slow economic impact to get out of it. Another school of thought is this is our now chance to emphasize the green economy. It's a reset to all industries. It's a reset time for all countries. Why don't we now bring a lens of environmental thinking back into the picture when we have the time to do it, as the world is now in a reset mindset? Another is inclusive growth, which is about that inequality that I mentioned before, that PricewaterhouseCoopers is saying, yes, we'll all grow out of this pandemic, economies will be larger, but not every sector will be benefited equally. So we need to find some sort of inclusive growth approach. And then, of course, the fourth school of thought is try and do the best of all worlds. So, 4 different approaches. And what these researchers did was they looked at I don't know if anyone's familiar with these, lots of companies. Macquarie Business School is now rallying around the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These are 17 agreed global goals that we can all work towards. And the Faculty of Arts degrees are now pivoting towards the Sustainable Development Goals. Faculty of Science is on board. Business School is on board. So basically, most of the university, everything that we teach, we're trying to channel towards, and research trying to channel towards these. And it's showing how it's a great way to bring economic growth together with environmental issues, together with health, together with education, and a more holistic view to approaching the world's problems. And with those 4 different scenarios of addressing, and I'll have to send this link to you because this chart is a lot to digest. But the moral of the story is that these researchers showed that actually just targeting GDP by itself is not going to give the best outcome to any of these United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So the way this chart works is the 17 goals are on the outside, going around the circle, and then there are 4 segments for each goal. The first segment is what would we achieve if we only focused on economic growth? So, for example, the goal of no poverty, if we only focused on economic growth, poverty would actually be helped very little. But if we focused on sustainable growth and more inclusive approach, The fourth one is the sustainable approach. You can see poverty actually has a big red tick here. So I hope the graph is kind of making a little bit more sense. So let's look at another global goal, the pink one here, which is called reduced inequalities. And there are four segments. The first one, what will happen to inequality if we only focus on economic growth? Inequality would hardly be addressed. A very tiny pink segment here. But if we focused on sustainable growth, the fourth pink one, you can see sustainable growth is achieved at a higher level. So there's a lot to digest in that chart. I'll send it across through on the email through your network. But it's a great way just to think about your line of work and your country in general, how it's actually been proven through research that focusing on economics and GDP alone, and I'm an economist, so I'm not even being biased. So focusing on my discipline is proving that it's not the only answer. We have to think holistically to address issues, including the pandemic. So I guess moving forward, I think everyone's now come to the realization that we need to focus a more holistic approach. The New Zealand government, they've they're trialing an approach called a well-being budget. So they're not just doing a fiscal budget based on dollars, but they're doing a well-being budget based on social and equality indicators and trying to see how that would impact. So I'd like to go back to the idea how yes, there's a pandemic, yes, there was a shock to the global economy, and governments around the world have tried this approach, and rightly so, I guess, because lots of people are losing jobs, health issues across the world, and the only way to help that is by government intervention. So what are some things we could possibly do to equip ourselves for the next time around so that we can self-navigate this and not overly rely on more government policy as such? A little bit of background about myself. So the photo on the left is me teaching with physical students in the classroom. The photo on the right is online teaching, and this is a photo a student has sent me of them watching me online and making notes at home. So it's very different. Of course, we're blessed in New South Wales. We are hopefully going to much more face-to-face teaching next semester at Macquarie. So the university you know and love has changed a lot. It physically looks different, and we have lots of online learning, which is great because now we get to meet faces and people that we otherwise wouldn't have thought about interacting with. Zoom has given us a great channel to meet alumni, to meet industry, to meet lecturers from overseas. And my research is, as Matt mentioned, about learning and teaching in economics. So I was bringing together education and economics into my research. And the idea behind my education side is this idea that there is a concept called the threshold concept. Everyone say threshold concept. I can see your lips moving. That's good. A threshold concept is something which you learn that it never escapes you. It stays with you for the rest of your life. It changes the way you think, it changes the way you see the world. And after having done my economic study, there are certain ways that I can't stop seeing the world again. And I see everything from an economics lens. In fact, I just wrote an article in our Lighthouse News, which is our Macquarie University media channel. And it's about vaccination, but I used an economics lens. I know nothing about health. I know nothing about vaccines, but can still talk about vaccination from an economics point of view. So I'm just going to go through some economics ideas and how those ideas could possibly give us insights to navigating the next uncertain global shock, which will occur. I mean, we had the GFC in 2008, we had the pandemic in 2020. I'm predicting something in 2027. I don't know what it is. Maybe you can put your ideas in the chat. What is the next global shock? Maybe Matt and Jackie become CEOs of the world together. That's the global shock that's coming our way. Or Thailand becomes the world superpower. Or Thailand and Indonesia and Japan become one country and they become a global superpower. I don't know. Anything's possible. So, one thing that I've noticed, and Australia is noticing this issue. So, we're having a vaccine rollout. Thailand's having a vaccine rollout. Aima was just talking about the vaccines just before we started. And we're noticing that we need to have this supply chain coordination when it comes to vaccines. And so far, Australia has not done the best job possible in coordinating that supply chain response. At the beginning of the year, the government of Australia had this approach of focusing on only one or two vaccines. And then people started panicking about a certain vaccine, and the government had to quickly change and try another vaccine. And then they said, oh, the Pfizer vaccine will come by October. And there's a huge time lag because you have to think about supply chain issues. And in economics, we talk about this idea called elasticity. For those of you who studied business, elasticity is this idea: how sensitive are you? Are you very sensitive and quick to respond? Are you not so sensitive and not very easy to respond? And if you think about a vaccine, what do you think in the chat? Producing a vaccine, very easy to respond, very difficult to respond. What are some ideas? Producing a vaccine to a virus, how easy is it to adjust supply? Feel free to put answers in the chat. Jackie and David and Matt, we've got very difficult, we've got difficult. I mean, if you think about it, a vaccine, it has to go through billions of dollars of research and development. It has to go through testing. It has to go through trials. It has to go through specific equipment. It has to go through storage. Some of these vaccines have to be stored at minus, I don't know, 200 degrees or whatever it is. It's very, very irresponsive, very inelastic, very not sensitive. So I guess a life lesson for us to learn is, in the businesses we run, how sensitive are we to respond to changes in the economy? How sensitive are we in responding to shocks to the economy? Are we running business models that are not agile? Are we running business models that focus on one supply chain and there's a disruption to that supply chain and then our whole business model falls apart? So I guess one way which industries are now thinking around the world is to make sure that our approach to supply chain management, our approach to our business model is more responsive and not very reliant on particular supply chains and having more supply chains in consideration. In fact, another idea from finance is this idea of portfolio diversification and risk. And now you've all studied at Macquarie, you've got a degree or 2 degrees, and you may have other skills. And everyone may know from finance theory that you have a diverse portfolio of skills, so that if, let's say, you have assets in shares, in bonds, in money, in property. If one of those sectors gets hit, you have other assets to help balance the portfolio. But if you have all your assets as shares and there's a shock to the share market, your entire portfolio will crash. So I would think about that from our skills perspective as well, and our business perspective as well. Make sure that your skills have a diverse portfolio, that you may have a business degree, but you're always learning and adding other skills to your degree. Through Macquarie, you have access to lifelong learning. We have short courses that we run. Jackie shares some great ideas through LinkedIn about different programs that we run to keep alumni skills up to date. Our business school alumni coordinator Ramya keep sending links through LinkedIn about short courses to keep updating yourself. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is if you have a diverse range of skills and there's a next shock to the global economy, you will be able to pivot yourself out of that shock, and because you're not relying on that one sector or that one set of skills. I hope that makes sense. That idea of portfolio diversification of your skill set as you as an individual. And if you run a business, don't focus on just one product. I saw this business the other day driving around Sydney. It was a van, and the company was called Doves R Us, the bird, doves. So this entire business focuses on doves being released at functions. That's very, very, very specific. I mean, imagine there's a pandemic and you can't use doves anymore because of concerns that the doves might spread the virus. What happens to your business model? Because you're only focusing on two birds. So I guess the moral of the story is have a business model that is diverse so that you are ready to have go through different challenges as the world will have. And another idea to think about challenges and shocks around the world, and you've seen this to luxury brands. Several luxury brands went bankrupt last year because they focused. I think it was Victoria's Secret, either bankrupt or went into administration. They're focusing on a luxury market. So what happens when you're selling a luxury product is you're focusing on the fact that people are rich or getting richer. So if there's a macroeconomic shock, the first thing people will do is stop buying luxury products. So it would make sense if you had a business model that had a range of products that not only focused on high end but also catered on middle tier and low end products as well. And an example I use is David Beckham. David Beckham, does anyone know who he models for? Who does David Beckham model for? Matt is thinking deeply. I actually don't know who he models for. I know it's one luxury brand, so I'm hoping somebody has an answer. Anyway, it's one of the designer brands, and he also models for H&M. So he models both extremes of the market, and he models pretty much the same products as well, and I'll keep those products nameless. But he actually models both extremes of the market. So if the global economy is doing great, he's got the luxury brand sorted. And if people's incomes are going down and they're going now to more middle tier, lower tier products, he's sorted as well. He's actually diversified his portfolio. And so the economic concepts here are income effect and substitution effect. Income effect is all about this idea: as people get richer, they buy more luxury products. Substitution effect is about substituting to similar products, which are substitutes, not exactly the same, but consumers start looking for substitutes. So yeah, I guess that's something for you to think about if you're running a business. If you're working for a business, maybe advise your managers to have both sets of products. I mean, even Macquarie, I mean, we have various degrees. We have MBAs, we have Bachelor of Commerce, Bachelor of Arts. We don't just focus on one degree for rich people. We have a variety of degrees to cater to all ends of the market, because we want to have a diversified portfolio so we can navigate all these shocks. I hope all these ideas are making sense in terms of planning for the next shock and navigating this pandemic by practicing some of these principles. Another principle in economics is this idea called economies of scale, which you may have heard of. Economies of scale is this idea that something will cost a lot of money at the beginning, and then the more you put that into practice by producing output over time, the average cost begins to decrease. So you've noticed that during the pandemic, it's those firms that had those big investments in technology, that had those investments in different ideas and artificial intelligence, that are now reaping the reward through the lower average cost. So it's a frame of thinking. Don't just think about the sunk cost, but think about the average cost what benefit will you get per unit if you have that investment? I mean, Macquarie is a great example. We've spent a few $1 million completely revitalizing and re-engaging our campus. Matt may have some photos to share. I don't know, later perhaps. Your alumni chapter will also share. We put lots, and it's expensive. Like, and if you think, oh, it's expensive, we shouldn't do it, but you have the reward through the lower average cost in the future. And here's something to completely throw what you may have learned in the past on its head. About 30 years ago, 20 years ago, it was all about specialization and division of labor. Focus on some skill, what you're good at, and that will be the best way for you to excel in this world, whether it's an individual or whether it's a firm. So you focus on one product, but the pandemic has shown that that's very risky, focusing on one skill, specializing as an individual or specializing as a firm. Those who are actually navigating this pandemic the best are those who are agile and can jump from skill to skill, industry to industry, and navigate and pivot and have that growth mindset. So, in the past, it was all about specialization, but I think now it's all about agility and being able to change. I mean, imagine Macquarie as a university. If we just stuck to our old model of teaching face to face and we gave up, we wouldn't be doing online teaching. I wouldn't be talking to you right now. And the whole business model would crash. So think about your business, what you work for, what you run. If you think very specialized, that's great, but also be prepared to be thinking about how can I have a more agile business model that can quickly adapt and change. And in Australia, the industries that are doing the best are the ones that we are using the phrase retool. There are now, factories that were designed to produce tires are now helping produce PPE for the pandemic, personal protection equipment for medical products. So they're pivoting the entire factory, and they have that huge sunk cost, and they can now use that sunk cost in a completely different way. If Jackie can let me know how much time I have, because I might just keep going because I'm too excited.
Yeah, you have about another 10, nearly 10 minutes, I'd say.
Yep.
And I'm sure we'd all love you to keep talking.
Another thing that's happening through this pandemic, and to be honest, I'm not 100% an expert on the Thai central bank, so perhaps somebody can enlighten me. What's happened with interest rates in Thailand this year and towards the end of last year? What's the central bank doing there? Who'd like to let us know? I've got some answers in the chat, I think. Thanks for the question about monetary policy. I'm just going to that. Oh, wow. I just put that slide up. I didn't even see the question. So monetary policy is all about, so there's two tiers of government, I shouldn't say two tiers of government. There's two arms that can help any macroeconomic issue. There's monetary policy from a central bank, and there's fiscal policy from a government. Typically, what a central bank will do is vary interest rates and try and expand the economy by lowering interest rates. Now, what's happened in Australia, the US, the Eurozone, the UK, Japan, interest rates are basically zero. Like the official cash rate in Australia is like 0.1, I think. That's the interest rate that the Reserve Bank charges the commercial banks. So practically zero. The interest rate has gone as low as possible. That's how big this crisis is. And central banks have now resorted to quantitative easing, which is a fancy word for printing money. If they called it printing money, people will get scared. So they're saying quantitative easing to keep people a bit more calm. And because interest rates have gone that low, that central banks are trying to stimulate the economy through other mechanisms. So hence the question I was asking, what's happening in Thailand? Amar or anybody from the Thailand chapter? Research question homework after this session. What's the Thai central bank doing? So it's actually making it very difficult, because if interest rates are already zero or very close to zero, what can central banks do? Which is why fiscal policy is stepping in. So this is where the government, so the central bank and the government are actually supposed to be different. Now, in some countries, the government tends to control the central bank a bit, but they should be quite different. Central banks control interest rates and the money supply. The government, through fiscal policy, controls tax, and they control public spending. So things like transport, health, education, social security payments for disadvantaged groups. So what would a government do when there's an economic downturn? They should reduce taxes and they should increase government spending. In Australia's case, I showed you an example of how disposable income has actually peaked during the pandemic. That's because the government has actually been doing quite a bit, giving out handouts to help those people who've lost their jobs or have less job security because of the pandemic. So interest rates are quite low. So now the government has had to spend a lot of money, billions in the latest budget. I think our public debt is now forecast to hit 1 trillion. So that now creates an equity issue, because who is going to pay this debt? So I don't want to be too controversial. There's many arguments for this. Some people say that's a good idea to still have debt, because perhaps future generations may benefit from the spending, because if the government builds a road today, then the next generation can still use the road. So maybe it's fair to ask the next generation to pay some of that interest. But then if the government gives me a handout of $1,000, and that's my personal handout, and I go shopping buying a new mobile phone, the next generation is not really going to benefit from that handout to me personally. So is it fair for my grandchildren to be paying the interest on what I enjoy? So I'm not going to say yes or no. That's for you to think about. But there's equity issues to think about, and that's a discussion, because around the world, Australia, Thailand, UK, America, rest of Asia, we are spending a lot. So that means someone may have to pay this debt via interest. So it's raising intergenerational equity issues for sure. So I guess mindset for yourselves in your careers, mindset for yourselves with education, mindset for yourself in the business you work for or the business you run is the way forward, both out of this pandemic and also being prepared for the next shock, is to adapt in agile business models, diversified portfolios, always learning new skills, whether it's for yourself as an individual or the business you work for or the business you run, being aware of your supply chains and not overly relying on one country or one business, and having a diverse supply chain, having multi modes of reaching your customers, online, brick and mortar, having a diverse portfolio of suppliers, diverse portfolio of products. I guess the pandemic has shown that this over reliance on specialization means that you're actually opening yourself to be shocked by one event that could make your entire career as an individual or entire business as a business fall apart, because you've only focused on one niche skill. I might, if I have 2-3 minutes, Jackie, segue into what Macquarie is doing, because it is an alumni think so. We should be practicing what we preach. What is Macquarie doing in this space? Well, since you've graduated, which some of you is recently and some of you is not so recently, um, we are now embedding employability more and more into our degrees. We are already Australia's #1 when it comes to employability, but we're making it that much more obvious that we're making sure that our students have soft skills, teamwork, collaboration, empathy. All these soft skills are embedded into our degree programs. Matt mentioned our Excel courses. Actually, Matt, it's actually 1 million learners. There's a missing zero, I think. Sorry, that's a type.
Right.
1 million learners in our Excel courses. And these are like courses that you can do to just upskill yourself. And they're free for the first week or a couple of dollars through Coursera, but they're Macquarie branded. You can get a little badge that you can add to LinkedIn. So the idea is lifelong learning to keep upskilling yourself. We're investing around our campus, making sure that we are practicing economies of scale so that students can reap that reward. We've released a new MBA called the Global MBA, which embeds all of this thinking into the degree. It's not the standard MBA. It now actually focuses on 6 skills: strategy, influence, leadership, adaptability, analysis, and problem solving. Usually an MBA is all about economics, accounting, marketing, finance, but we've turned it all around. It's all in there, but we're spun and pivoted completely differently because these are the soft skills. So we frame the MBA on soft skills, and you will learn the hard skills of accounting, marketing, finance within that new framing. We've got a new incubator on campus to help nurture students' ideas and industry ideas and give a place for ideas to grow and all that talk about agility that I mentioned before. And we are getting involved in our community with our widening participation team, reaching rural schools, remote schools all around New South Wales as well. I'm the course director for the Bachelor of Commerce. And in the Bachelor of Commerce, the way we are building soft skills in our students is even though they're commerce students and even though they have a major, we put them in mixed majors and we ask them to use their mixed majors to solve a United Nations Sustainable Development Goal. So instead of marketing students being only with marketing students, we say, here's one marketing student, one accounting student, one HR student, one management student. How will you bring your skills together to address goal number 4, quality education? So they build a business model and they talk about the marketing, they talk about the finance, and they're using their business skills to address global issues. Yeah, and I think that's a good place for me to end. And if anybody wants to keep in touch with all the amazing innovations that are happening, obviously the alumni networks have great avenues of communication, and we also have our Lighthouse News platform as well, which showcases the latest research and teaching that's coming out of Macquarie University. And those are the 5 main areas that our publications come under if you want to keep in touch. Um, yeah, be open to any questions.
Thank you, Prashant. It was absolutely fantastic. Very interesting. Just while we're waiting for, we've got a couple of questions that have come through the chat that I'll read out, but I thought just a couple of observations there. I really enjoyed around the specialization and agility, and something that comes to mind is I think of airline pilots, such highly trained, highly professional, prestigious, all out of work. You think A380 pilots can't find work. So things like that, really incredible to be able to move around. And I'm taking your advice too, I must say, Prashant, and I'm actually enrolled in the GMBA and the Global MBA. Absolutely loving it. It's really
There you
interesting.
go. And on the note of airlines, Woolworths, I believe, was taking Qantas ground staff because that's a transferable skill. The way the ground staff work, whether they work at Qantas or whether they work at Woolworths, it's a transferable skill. Airline pilots, very tricky skill, isn't it?
Very specialist.
Yeah, very specialized. So I guess it will change the way those industries think. Do I only train to be an airline pilot, or do I have another degree on the side, like a business degree, so that I can quickly pivot? Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think Wasson, a comment there. Thai news agencies hardly mention Bank of Thailand, but the Thai government has had many relief populist programs, mostly sending e-money via an app to Thai people to ask them to spend it at local businesses. Says the programs are for the poor, but the poor cannot afford phones with apps. So perhaps that's not really maybe effective.
Is that a question or a comment, Matt?
We'll take that as a comment, I think, Rashaan. But what?
It's happening here too, isn't it? Like in
Yeah.
New South Wales, we have a program called Dine and Discover vouchers, and the government is giving us four $25 vouchers to help small businesses. But the number one business that's been profiting is KFC, apparently. So
Yeah, they probably don't really need it. Can we open up to the floor? Would anybody like to ask any questions? Any coming through? Feel free to either chat or you can just jump in. Okay. I've got a question then, just while we're waiting as well. Is I think for Thailand in particular, and then I also think of Indonesia, heavily reliant on tourism for their economies. I think Thailand would it be pushing, someone can correct me, would Thailand be pushing towards 20% GDP, I think, in tourism? And I think the island of Bali in Indonesia would be up around, I think it's 70 to 80%. So how would you sort of tend to see recovery with that, Prashant? Do you think that could bounce back quite quickly? Or again, you talk about diversification again in economy there?
wow, what a $1 million question. Every country I would be earning $1 million in consultancy by all the tour, including I'm a dual citizen of Australia and Sri Lanka, another country impacted by tourism. I guess, yeah. I mean, an over-reliance on one industry and a shock like this will have ramifications. I used to live in Saudi Arabia, and they had an over-reliance on oil, and only now they're starting to diversify the economy. Very difficult because they've isolated themselves already. So, excuse me. I'm not sure what the answer is, because it's all dependent on the success of the vaccine rollout. Um, I guess hotels, for example, in Sri Lanka's case, hotels have completely pivoted to domestic, and also to turn into pseudo hospitals. So they've become the place where people go to for their quarantine, and hotels are lining up for the government to use them as quarantine centers or vaccination centers. So they're trying their best to take advantage of the need. So we have these five-star hotels. Yeah, so that could be one approach, pivoting the actual infrastructure you already have. The Qantas ground staff approach, going to Woolworths, highly trained staff in the tourism industry with customer relations. Could they pivot themselves to call center type jobs or any other avenue that requires customer service? Can they start training others in the meantime? Can those who are already in the sector start training the next groups for when the pandemic is under control in about a year after vaccines are all rolled out? As to the answer, Matt, in numbers, I wouldn't want to say because I don't want to pretend to know. But yeah, very difficult question for tourism reliant countries at the moment, definitely.
Anybody else like to talk or highlight about that, or any other questions? We've got quite a few in from Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, Japan with us on what's happening at home for you. Everyone's so quiet.
Well, I have a question then if nobody else has. Prashant, I'm just interested in what are the businesses you could talk about, or just industries generally, that have thrived because of or during the pandemic? Obviously, I think Zoom is one of them, but are there any other interesting industries or things you've observed that have done really well?
I guess an interesting industry is like laptop stands, laptop peripherals. They're booming. Freezers had a good run in 2020. People started stocking up on food, so things like that. So I guess anything from home appliances to software and hardware for all this type of the new way of work, right? Because now people are working from 12 time zones away or 2 hours away from work and not commuting. So we've got people working in different countries. We've got people not traveling to the city anymore. We've got countries, the United Arab Emirates, Dubai is introducing visas where you can just live in Dubai but work for Australia for 12 months. So there's a pivot for for tourism. So take advantage of Australian workers to boost their tourism industry and live and work in our country instead. So yeah, some interesting things that you wouldn't really think about that people are buying. Home exercise equipment has boomed because people are working out at home and scared to go to gyms because of pandemics. Online classes, that million number of students came because we were 600,000 before the pandemic, and then we hit a million in the middle of 2020 because another 400,000 students decided
Wow.
to study something because they were stuck at home and upskilling themselves. Plus they realized the necessity of upskilling themselves. So, interestingly, online teaching has had a boom during this pandemic as well.
On a really smaller scale, I know with the quarantine, I had a friend who was recently in quarantine in Sydney, and a couple of individuals have opened a business where they're supplying exercise equipment, things like Xboxes and things like that to people who are in quarantine in Sydney, and
There
apparently
you
making a
go.
fortune, doing very well.
Oh,
A couple of questions. One here through from Winnie. Could you please reflect your thoughts on the characteristics of agile universities?
wow, good question. I guess an agile university is, first of all, it depends on the academics. We historically universities were this ivory tower. You came to the ivory tower to absorb knowledge, and we poured knowledge onto you like a fountain. So the sector by definition did not was not meant to be agile. It was meant to be this ivory tower that people just looked at and wanted to be like. But universities are now becoming, we have to keep learning as academics. I need to keep up to date with what's happening around the world. I need to keep up to date with new research, new theories in my field, new ways of teaching, new ways of researching. So an agile university, I would say, if you're having an experience with Macquarie University right now, which is not the same as the day you last left, then I would say Macquarie University is agile. If you're talking to Macquarie on Zoom like you are now, and your last interaction while on campus was face to face, we are an agile university. If you are seeing Macquarie do crazy things that we haven't ever done before, the buildings we're building, the industries we're partnering with, the courses we're teaching, how we're teaching the courses, the variety of courses on offer, how we are getting new staff on board. If all those things are changing in front of your eyes and you can keep up to date through LinkedIn, and Jackie and Susan and the team and Matt do an amazing job updating, and you can just even if you had nothing to do with Macquarie and you just observed all the posts about Macquarie, I think it would prove that we are quite agile. And I'm not even being subjective because I mentioned this point last year during the pandemic and about the lighthouse that I mentioned before, that publication that we have. And I noticed in 2020 that pretty much Macquarie was the only university that was reporting on the pandemic from every angle, not just health, which everybody was doing, but we were reporting about the pandemic through a business lens, through an arts lens, through science and technology, through the environment. and we won an award for that. We won 2 awards, two Australian media awards. So we were competing with media companies in these categories. And that was because we were using academic expertise, but bringing it to the general public to help them understand and navigate this pandemic. And then, funnily enough, other universities stole our idea and started doing a similar thing. But I think that was a very objective way to prove that we are agile in the way we approach research and teaching. Traditionally, universities put research through journals, which still happens and which is still good, but we came up with this model of, making it current. A journal article can take 2 years, 3 years. The pandemic is happening right now, so we got our lecturers in from all different fields commenting and giving expertise on this pandemic. And and that was proved by 2 national media awards for the university, competing against media companies.
And I can see, Wasim, you've got a question in there as well. Did you want me? I'll ask it for you, or did you want to ask Prashant? Okay, I'll ask for you in case you're having issues there with the microphone. So, Prashant, this one is from Wasim. His question is, I've learned that you are a fellow of the Higher Education Academy. Have you integrated the UN's SDGs in active learning? If so, could you give an example of activities you may have used in class?
Oh my gosh, what a great question. This is my day in, day out since the middle of 2020. That's pretty much all I do. I wish I could, I have like a million photos. Where do I start? So we reimagined the capstone of the Bachelor of Commerce, which is the last subject in the degree. And we asked the students to bring all of their skills together to bring in cross-disciplinary mixed teams to solve a goal. So picture a classroom where there's 10 big tables of teams of 5, and they're sitting in groups of 5, 10 of them, and that's a team, and they're mixed. There could be one accountant, one HR person, one marketing, and so on. And they pick a goal. So they pick, for example, quality education as their goal. And then they figure out, how do I bring my economics and my accounting and my marketing, all of this together to create quality education. So what we do for the active learning part, we have butcher paper on the table, we have markers, we use software. One tool is called Padlet. Another tool is called Mural, so we can collaborate with our online students as well as our face-to-face students. We have Lego in the classroom for collaboration. The students do team activities using Lego. One Lego activity is how they develop their team building skills. So we have a race. Each of the 10 tables gets the same Lego set. Then they spend 5 minutes planning and 10 minutes building, and we see which team does it the fastest. And then they reflect on their communication, their collaboration, their conflict management, their problem solving. And it's just a generic way of building skills for the actual project. Each week they go through an activity sheet based on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We ask them to, midway through the semester, to consult each other. And then towards the end of the semester, our students consult with the Faculty of Science students and vice versa. So there's a lot of active learning happening in that space, using software, using physical things in the classroom, using Lego, using many things. It's a very interesting unit. I hope I've answered the question. I guess it's from a teacher in the audience. Is Wasin a teacher?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Prashant. I'm a new lecturer.
I'd love to keep in touch beyond this and learn from you as well, actually. Yeah.
Sure. I'm a friend of you in LinkedIn already.
Awesome.
Yeah.
He's just recently finished his PhD with us at Macquarie. So yes, perfect.
There you go.
Thank
I
you.
think we are looking at really coming up to time. So perhaps one last quick question, and we've already got one in, and it's from Pong Pon around, could you possibly comment about the e-commerce industry in Australia? Will the COVID-19 impact change the customer behaviour or retailers' current business model? Any thoughts?
I've seen a lot of research on LinkedIn from Macquarie Business School staff about customer behavior being changed because of the pandemic. I'm not an expert, to be honest, on customer behavior, but I can say anecdotally, I've also seen how consumers have changed their behavior. I mean, I have changed my behavior. I actually would never use any credit card or PayPal on my phone. In the past, I'm like, someone's going to hack my phone. But now it's just second nature to me. I'm like, if somebody steals it, I'll just call the bank and figure it out later. So it's made people more digitally using their digital transactions even more. It's converted me, for example. I'm not an expert on consumer behavior, so it wouldn't be fair for me to give an answer. I can say if you follow Jana Bowden, Jana Bowden, on LinkedIn from Macquarie Business School, she's an expert on consumer behavior, often called upon by the media to comment. But yes, anyone in e-commerce is definitely benefiting from the pandemic, and anyone who jumps in first is benefiting more than whoever jumps in second. So it's a trend to get on, and it's the business model of the future.
Absolutely. Well, I think that is all the time we've got. We are up, but that's the end of official proceedings. And again, please welcome me or thank me and join me in welcoming. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Please thank me in with Prashant for that amazing presentation. Really, really insightful, Prashant. I think that was fantastic. Learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience also got a lot out of that. Now, I think Jackie, David, you're going to stay around a little bit for some networking, I think. I do have to depart. I've got another meeting to jump straight into. So again, thank you to everyone for joining us today. Great to connect and have you with us, and really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Thank
and
you.
I'll connect with you on LinkedIn as well, like Wasim.